Hello and welcome back to Bitesize Boxing. So, I'm going to do a little preview for this Usyk Verhoeven fight and the card. Apologies if there's not as much enthusiasm in my voice as there has been. Long day at work, long week at work. How's it only Tuesday? Good lord. But yeah, so let's just get straight into this one. First things first, by the way, if you're new here, please do subscribe. Even if you've been here and you're sort of coming back, do appreciate it because I'd never mention it and you really should because otherwise people just don't. So, let's talk about Usyk versus Verhoeven. So, this is one of those Saudi cards where it does really feel like the Saudis are kind of pulling out of boxing a little bit. I'm not saying completely, but obviously they all came, in all guns blazing. We had massive cards, stacked cards, massive promotion for it everywhere and that kind of thing. This isn't that. Yes, it's at the Pyramids of Giza. Yes, it's going to have quite a cool backdrop and it's going to, aesthetically look cool. But from a promotional point of view, there feels like there's been none for this fight. And even in terms of this fight itself, I mean, Rico Verhoeven, I mean, who is he? I understand that, within kickboxing, he's a legend of that sport, but kickboxing in of itself is a pretty niche sport outside of the Netherlands and a couple of other, territories in the world. Is not a particularly big sport. It's not like with Francis Ngannou where there was that crossover appeal from the UFC. There just isn't really that. So even this fight in of itself, it's not a fight that really any casuals are even getting up for. And so it's a little bit of a weird one. I mean, from Oleksandr Usyk's perspective, he's just, robbing the bank. He's getting the bag here. In terms of how I see this fight going, I mean, I've looked at a little bit of footage of Verhoeven or Verhoeven, however you say his name. He looks competent, but not fantastic, to be honest. I mean, for someone like Oleksandr Usyk should just piece him up and take him to school. I think Oleksandr Usyk can probably stop this guy whenever he wants. One thing about Verhoeven is he's got a real tell whenever he lets his hands go. He kind of jolts forward before he throws. And so he's not got a good poker face in terms of hiding his punches. Everything he throws is incredibly telegraphed from the jab to the right hand. That's one thing I have noticed from looking at his footage. So I think Usyk is going to read him like a book. That being said, I do expect this to go some rounds. Oleksandr Usyk isn't the kind of guy who's just going to go through you in, 1 or 2 rounds. That isn't really his style. I think Usyk will probably at least respect Verhoeven and just see what he's got in front of him. It's kind of Lomachenko style, download that data before piling it on and sort of taking him out. I think that's what Usyk will do. I think he'll probably just have a look, maybe even go on the back foot for the first 2 or 3 rounds, just see what Verhoeven has. And then once he realises, this is what he throws, these are his combinations, then I think he'll just counter him to death and take him out, probably within 5 rounds or something like that. I'll be surprised if this gets into the second half. So, again, as far as the main event's concerned, I couldn't really care less. It is what it is. Yeah, it's one of them ones. I mean, there isn't really too much to talk about as far as I'm concerned. I mean, it's not like we've really got anything to go off of, really, as far as Rico Verhoeven's concerned. And as I say, I just don't have any interest in it, really. So that is that. In terms of the undercard, again, let me just bring it up in front of me. So the undercard, really, in terms of what to speak of, you've got Hamza Shiraz versus Alan Begic. Now, this reminds me an awful lot of when they dug up that guy for Billy Joe Saunders back in the day. What was his name? Shefat Sufi, I think he was called, who was some just obscure, no-good German super middleweight. The long play was that Frank Warren wanted to get that bag, wanted to get the Canelo fight. Canelo was going to be stepping up to 168 at that point. I can't remember. I think he'd just stepped up. I think he'd just fought Rocky Fielding, hadn't he? And so he wanted that bag with Canelo, so he did a WBO special, and he got him in there against a no-hoper. Of course, BJS himself was a middleweight at best. In fact, you had his trainer, who was it? Ingle at the time, who was saying really and truly he was a 154-pounder who was just ill-disciplined. And he got him a fight up at 168, never should have been at that weight, and got him in there against a no-hoper just to pick up a belt for a fight later down the line. Very much, this is kind of the same thing with Hamza Shiraz. The Saudis have been absolutely desperate to get this guy a world title, and between them and Frank Warren, it appears they've managed to do a WBO special and just dig this guy up from anywhere. Look, Hamza Shiraz, there's no point even really talking about this fight. Alan Begic, I think he's fought absolutely nobody. He's nearly 40, I think, and he's obviously there just to get splattered in a round or two. Probably will get taken out with inside 3 by Hamza Shiraz. So again, nothing to really report there. You then have Frank Sanchez versus Richard Torres. Now, if this fight was being made maybe 2.5 years ago, I might have a bit more interest. The issue is that Frank Sanchez, let's be honest, he's supposedly, 32, 33 or something. Bullshit, he's about 45. Again, he's one of these Cubans who has come over on sketchy paperwork. We can look at him and go, yeah, you're not your age, are you, mate? And so he is very clearly already past his best. The best that we've seen of him in the pros was probably 3 or 4 years ago. He's very clearly slowing down. He's riddled with injuries. One of his legs appears to not work. In that fight he's had recently where he got absolutely splattered by Cabello, he could barely move. He's been wearing knee braces for the longest time. So again, I look at this in the same way I look at as if you were digging up some guy who in his mid-40s. You'd go, he's past his best, he's riddled with injuries, and he's just not what he used to be. Even though technically Sanchez is fresh and early-ish on in his career, Sanchez is one of those fighters, so Sanchez is past his best. So although I don't rate Richard Torres that highly, I think there are some pretty glaring limitations with him, particularly defensively. Offensively, he's quite impressive. I do think that he's just going to be too fast, too youthful, and just have a bit too much because, again, he's in there against an old man. And then, other than that, you have Jack Catterall against Shakram Giasov, who I think is from Uzbekistan. One of those really highly touted amateurs. A weird fight for Catterall. I mean, where's Catterall at these days? He's fighting up at 147 pounds. 140 was clearly his best weight, but he was one of those that always fell just short at elite level. Very unlucky in the Josh Taylor fights, it must be said. But again, when he went in there against Arnold Barboza, was just not quite good enough. And I don't think up at 147 pounds at 32, approaching 33, I don't see it being too good for Catterall. It's one of those where it's a lose-lose if he beats Giasov. Giasov is not a big name, so people aren't going to be really looking at him for that. No one's going to be going, cool, Jack Catterall beat Giasov. They go, well, who the hell was Giasov? Whereas this is a fight against a well-schooled amateur, a guy who's unbeaten in his own right, who is in his physical prime, who you could probably, if he beats Jack Catterall, I wouldn't be shocked, and I don't think many people would be. But then if he does, then he's lost to a relative unknown, and it's bad for Jack Catterall. So, if I had to guess, I haven't really seen much of Giasov, but I would say maybe I'm just going to go with who I've seen more of, I suppose, and say Catterall nicks it maybe on points, but I'm not confident in that pick at all. If Giasov turns him over, I wouldn't be shocked. Again, Catterall is in this very much, in the twilight of his career himself. As I say, he's approaching his mid-30s now, early to mid-30s, and he hasn't looked great as of recent. I think he's just come off that performance against Eko Esserman, where he did get rid of Esserman, but it was a workman-like performance. And on top of that, I don't think he's working with Bozy Ennis anymore. And one thing I would say is that when he was with Bozy, he was actually able to... The thing is with Catterall for the longest time is he was just far too negative on the back foot all the time. Bozy actually got that offense out of him a little bit, and I wanted to see more of that. And I imagine now he's not with Bozy, that's probably going to go back into the locker, and we're going to see more of the negative Catterall again. So, not really too excited about that fight either. And really and truly, that's the card. There's a super fly fight on the undercard as well, but their fighters, I'll be honest, I know nothing about. Other than that, that's it. So, it's one of those ones where if I'm sat in on Saturday night, I'll watch it, but if I'm out, I think that I might have plans on Saturday night to see some friends. I'll probably be out doing that, and I'll just catch the results the next day. Not that bothered. Pretty shit main event, to be honest, and a pretty rubbish undercards as well to boot. But you let me know what you think. I'll be interested to know. Take it easy, guys. Cheers.